All right, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of Make Music Connect. I hope you've been enjoying the session so far this morning. And this session is Opportunity of a Lifetime, Federal Funds for Music and Arts Education. Before we get started and I introduce our moderator, I just have a couple of housekeeping announcements. In the chat, we've added some links. The first one is to the Whova download. If you have not yet put that on your mobile devices, it's a great way to access the content after or during. The second is a publisher's choice list. These are recommended repertoire from each of our publishers. So if you'd like to see some new music, you can check those out. The third one is a certificate of attendance. So that's also in the description of this session. So if you're trying to find that after and don't need to scroll up through the chat, you can find it in 2 places. And then there's some advocacy tool links and the NAFME ESSER funding toolkit, which we will discuss, I believe, in this session as well. Just a reminder, this is being recorded as all of the live sessions are, and in about a week, those will be added into the on-demand sessions, and you'll have exclusive access to those through the end of July. So if you missed anything or wanted to revisit a session, you can access all of that content for the next several weeks. We will have some time for Q&A at the end of this session, so feel free to add those into the Q&A section on Whova. I'll be moderating those. We'll be able to chime in there, and I know our panel will be happy to answer as many as we can. If for some reason we can't answer all of them due to timing, there is a community board for federal funding, and so we can move those questions over there and continue the dialogue. So with that, I'd love to introduce our moderator for our session. Lynn Tuttle serves as the Executive Director and the CEO of American String Teachers Association, which is the nation's premier service organization for string educators in schools, private studios, and in higher ed. I'll let everyone read through her pretty extensive bio, but she has a long history in public policy, working with NAFME and several organizations. So Lynn, welcome, and I'm going to hand this over to you to take it from here.
Thanks, Jen, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us for this session. So I have some slides to take you through to give you an overview of this incredible amount of federal funding that has been activated right now in public education. So I'm going to do a quick overview, probably 10 minutes, may leave you feeling a little breathless, but the whole point is to get our panelists onto screen so they can share how they've made use of these funds already in their school districts. So I want to thank our panelists for being with us. We have Joe Gershon with us from Albuquerque Public Schools and Joe Clark with us from Spring ISD, as well as working with the Texas Music Administrators Conference. So you'll get to hear more from them in a moment, but let's go through the slides. All right, so what you're seeing on the screen in front of you are all of the versions of ESSER funds. ESSER stands for the Elementary and Secondary Schools Emergency Relief Funds, so ESSER funds. Gotta love federal education policy, right? Because, sorry, we love the acronyms. So I just want to stay here for a moment. I'm moving my bar around so I can see all of the dollar signs and figures in front of me. There were 3 different COVID relief packages going back from March of 2020 through March of 2021, so over the course of about a year and 13 months, where Congress made investments in public education. And they did so because they were deeply concerned as we entered the pandemic and we shut down and locked down across the nation. States started to lose a lot of their tax funds, right? So their coffers started to dry up. And of course, Congress knew that would then impact K-12 public education. So in their relief funds and relief bills that came out in March, in December, and in March again, over the time of the pandemic, they made significant investments in K-12 education, along with higher ed. And that governor's piece, in essence, was flexible funds that the governors could use to support education, either K-12 or higher ed in their state. So $30.7 billion was the first influx of funds in through the CARES Act, then $82 billion in December 2020 through the COVID relief package, and the final package, the American Rescue Plan, poured an additional $168 billion into the system to support K-12 education. To give you a sense of how big these numbers are, the annual sort of support for Title I, Part A, typically runs between $15 billion and $17 billion. So these, are much bigger than that, and certainly the last number sort of makes Title I dollars look superfluous in comparison. It's like 10 times bigger than the traditional Title I spend. All right, so told you what the name was, told you how many zeros were involved, because there are a lot of zeros involved when you're talking about billions. What was the purpose of this? Well, the purpose of these funds were to support all public, sometimes private schools, depending on the version of the bill, first, second, or third, during the pandemic, with a focus on creating safe and healthy learning environments for our nation's students and supporting students' social and emotional well-being. Now, the main thing is these funds are available, especially that big pot, that final version of funds, available now through September 30th of 2024. So while the funds have been distributed, school districts have had their plans in, there's still an opportunity to gain access to these funds because school districts will be amending and changing their plans all the way up through September 30th of 2024. And again, our panelists can speak to that with the work that they've been doing in their school districts. All right, so told you the amounts, told you what the amounts were for. So how do they function? In order to have your school district receive any ESSER grant amounts, you have to have at least one Title I school within that school district. Doesn't mean the funds have to be used at a Title I school, but the district needed to be part of the Title I granting formula that existed in the Elementary and Secondary Education Act under ESSA. So the funds aren't Title I funds. They don't function like that. We'll talk about how they function in a moment, but that's just how the allocations came down. So that you had to have a place, Congress had to have a way to figure out how to do the allocation, so they attached it to Title I, right? Again, you don't have to be a Title I school to use the funds, but you have to have at least one Title I school in your school district for your school district to have an allocation of these funds, to have some of these funds dedicated to that school district. To give you an example of how much money we're talking about, this is just looking at that third one, that third final round of funds that came down in March of 2021. Boston City Public Schools estimated to reach $276 million under ESSER 3. Memphis City Public Schools in Shelby County in Memphis, Tennessee, more than $500 million of federal funds. So these aren't the state funds, the local funds. These are the federal funds attached to just the American Rescue Plan, that third pot of ESSER funds. And this is the kicker. School districts have incredible flexibility in how the funds are spent. And that was actually intentional on the part of Congress. So Congress wanted to make certain that schools could be open safely for students to participate, that students' social and emotional and mental well-being were being taken care of, and that students have had access to learning during the pandemic. So those are sort of the underlying issues that Congress was attempting to address with these funds. So how can you use the funds? Well, depending on which version of ESSER you're looking at, there are 15 or 16 fundable activities for ESSER, and particularly ESSER 3 funds. And I have to say, without a lot of stretch, almost any music and arts program can qualify under all of the fundable activities listed in the law and in federal guidance. In fact, about a year ago, I'd say 15 months ago, when I was still working for the National Association for Music Education, we did a month-long of Twitter announcements where we took a fundable activity and then we said how music programs could benefit from that fundable activity and make the connection. So if you got a Twitter feed, you might want to go back and check out NAFME's Twitter feed from, I think, April and May of 2021, because we give you examples across all of them. Now I'm going to give you just a few examples. So fundable activity number 6, training and professional development of staff at the local education agency. That's just a fancy phrase meaning district. Training and professional development for staff on sanitation and minimizing the spread of infectious diseases. So again, this could fit for music and arts educators, right? What's the best way to support instrument hygiene and safety practices in arts classrooms? So that could be spacing of students. It could be how materials are handled. It could be how students enter and exit your room, so that there's less congestion, right? When you think about the spread of infectious diseases and sort of proximity. So all of those ways of training and thinking about it and sharing those ideas and suggestions across your teaching workforce could be funded under fundable activity number 6. Fundable activity number 7, purchasing supplies to sanitize and clean the facilities, including buildings operated by the school district. Cleaning supplies, right? And think of instrument hygiene, think of HEPA filters for air filtration in your rehearsal rooms, right? That air exchange rate and making sure that the air is getting filtered appropriately. Really useful, and it's going to cut down on disease spread, even if it's not COVID, right? So those are things that can benefit our arts classrooms. Fundable activity number 11, planning and implementing activities related to summer learning and supplemental after-school programs. So think about summer camps, summer lessons, additional after-school lessons that you might supply to students, particularly those that may not be able to access private instruction on their own, right? And again, these funds could hire the faculty to do this work, could reimburse faculty that are already doing this work so that they get paid for the students who traditionally can't afford to pay them, right? All of that is possible under fundable activity number 11. That was very music specific, but I think you could extrapolate other examples of how that could work in the other arts. Fundable activity number 12, addressing learning loss in school districts among students, including low-income students, children with disabilities, English language learners, racial and ethnic minorities, students experiencing homelessness, and children and youth in foster care. So think about what you could do in your music and arts programs. Think about how students are doing now compared to prior to the pandemic, and where you may have seen skill loss, delay in learning or progression within their study in music or in the arts, and think about how you could provide additional assistance for them. This could look like tutoring in a reading classroom or math classroom. Maybe it's additional private instruction here. Maybe it's small group instruction with an expert on that instrument or an expert in that area of study that you're doing in your arts classroom. All of those things will be fundable under fundable activity number 12. And now we're coming to my favorite fundable activity, activity 15. At this point, you can fund pretty much anything that was ongoing at your school prior to the pandemic under the auspices of fundable activity number 15. Other activities that are necessary to maintain the operation of and continuity of services, think programs, in school districts, and continue to employ existing staff of that school district. So I love this one in particular because for many of our colleagues around the nation, and perhaps this is your case as well, you may have seen your program shrink because of the pandemic. Maybe students didn't feel engaged because they weren't able to play together in an ensemble. Maybe they didn't sign up to come to band or orchestra this coming year because of what they experienced during the pandemic. So maybe your programs are smaller, and often when that happens, that means fewer classes within your schedule. That could mean that you get pushed back to part-time, or your colleagues getting pushed back to part-time, or you're having to teach things outside of your content area. So instead, you could use the ESSER funds to continue to employ those arts educators who might be impacted by shrinking numbers of students in their programs, continue to employ them full-time and have them be working on recruitment, on retention, on rebuilding those programs. And it's such a great way to use the ESSER funds because these aren't funds that are going to be around forever. But if you invest right now in rebuilding those programs, the teachers aren't going to need those funds for their salaries moving forward, right? They're going to create, their programs will become robust again, and you can fund them through their normal funding streams. So I love that as one way to make use of my favorite, fundable activity 15, where you can fund pretty much anything that's offered at the school through these ESSER dollars. All right, so how do you access these dollars? I just told you that they're flexible. I told you that there's a lot of money out there. I told you that while school districts will have plans in place, they're going to be amending and making changes to them over time, all the way up until September 30th of 2024. So these dollars are still with us for a few years. So how do you access those funds? Well, the law requires that the community get engaged, that parents, teachers, administrators, community leaders are at the table to determine how to prioritize these funds, right? These aren't just music and arts funds. These are funds for the entirety of the school district and of the programs that the schools offer. So there are going to be lots of requests coming to the table, but you want to make certain that you have a music and arts advocate at the table as well, whether that's you or a band booster parent or someone who's really active with your theater group. Make certain that you have an arts voice at the table so that arts concerns can be part of that prioritizing conversation. And ultimately, you're not doing the grant writing. Your federal programs director, probably the person who oversees Title I for your school district, will be submitting the grant plan back to the state for approval in order to access the funds. So you don't have to write a big fancy grant. You don't need to be a grant writer to do this. There's someone within your school district who will be gathering this information, prioritizing what's going to happen in your school district with these funds, and submitting the application on behalf of the school district. You just need to know who that person is and make certain that you're engaged in the community work leading up to those decisions. So if you get yourself invited to the table or have a parent advocate invited to the table, how should you come to that table? Well, I'd be prepared with some specific requests for funding and why, right? Can you document the needs of your programs because of the pandemic? Can you speak to learning loss that your students have experienced within the music and arts classrooms? Can you speak to how your students value your program and why it's important to help rebuild this program, along with addressing the other issues and concerns that community members, teachers, administrators are going to bring to this ESSER funding table. And I strongly encourage you, and you'll hear some great examples from our panelists here in a moment, to coordinate with others so you have a unified request, perhaps meeting multiple needs across music, dance, theater, visual arts, right? Imagine you came forward with a package of arts education requests that you would prioritize. Probably won't get them all, but if you're coming in unified, you might do better than if you're each coming at it piecemeal. And we as arts advocates and music education advocates aren't the only ones saying that these ESSER funds can be used to support music and arts learning. The U.S. Department of Education says the same thing. So under our current Secretary of Education, we've gotten guidance coming out from the department just over a year ago saying that as an LEA, again, local education agency or school district, can address the needs of students arising from COVID-19 using ESSER funds to implement or expand arts programs such as music programs. So the Department of Ed realizes as well that these funds can be used to help expand programs, particularly when you think about ways to reach students who may not traditionally have been reached by our programs or may have been left behind from our programs when we had to go online over the course of the pandemic. So really lean into thinking about how are you serving students, how will these requests help more students participate, and how are you building more equitable access to your programs when you think about making the case for the use of ESSER funds. Additional resources can be found at this website, artsareducation.org. This is a collaborative arts education advocacy space that got built over the course of the pandemic. So again, you'll find some ESSER funds and Title IV Part A, a different federal funding source, resources on that website. And now I'm going to stop talking and stop sharing, and you're going to hear from the real experts in this room. We've got Joseph Gershon with us from Albuquerque Public Schools. Joseph, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, that was a whirlwind, wasn't it? Whew. And then we got Dr. Joe Clark joining us from the great state of Texas. Hey, Joe.
Thanks, Lynn. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So now I get to ask questions of these folks who've been on the ground making great use of these funds to support music and arts education. So I'm going to start with Joseph. So can you tell us how you made use of ESSER funds in Albuquerque Public Schools, and what did you get to use those funds for? How much and what did you get?
Right. So when it first came out, it's good to say that we were following NAFME and all the national organizations and, how we could use the money and everything. And our district was way behind the ball on that. So we were coming up with ideas and ways to spend it long before our district told us how we could apply for it. We ended up applying for just over $10 million.
Wow.
For things from getting buses for every single secondary, program, music and art to attend, all their performances for art to go to library or museums and art shows and different things, to just supplies like for heavily for art, but also for music, like reeds and things that were disposable or expendable for students. We put in money for PAC updates, lighting and sound at the performing arts centers at all of our schools. We actually have a musical instrument repair shop, so we put in for some additional positions there and some additional funding for supplies. We did kilns and kiln rooms at all of our K through 12 schools that didn't have it, because most do, but not all. We also wanted to update the instrument repair instrument classroom storage at all the schools, and just kind of got some quotes and everything together. We put in for some money for guest presenters for PD. We found out how many schools did not have, they call them band trucks, but essentially they're music like department trucks for the whole music department, or well, fine arts department to use to fill that in. And we also did alternative ensemble equipment.
Oh, nice.
So the unfortunate part is all of those things did not get funded, but the two that did get funded were our curriculum ask, and we actually are in a unique place where our elementary art and music switch every year, and we've been expanding that to get it where we won't have to switch. So every single elementary will have art and music.
Awesome.
And so we got money from that. So we asked for about 10, a little over 10, and we got a little over 3 of approved money. Essentially, we put in a request. We went to for our curriculum money. The big thing was finding out from our district how they wanted us to get the money and like what their criteria was. So we had come up with all these lists, and it was how are they going to determine the criteria, because every department, every school was asking for money, and we knew we weren't going to get most of it, but it was like, we're going to ask for as much as possible and see what we get. And so our district actually broke it down into, they had 5 criteria that they were looking on, and you had to pick one, but we made sure that we could tag them into as many of those criteria as possible. So like it was learning loss was the big one, which don't like that word, but that's the word that they chose to use. So that's the word that we had to use, the words that we had to use. So we tagged learning loss, SEL, and then the safety with like getting enough instruments for people to not share, or supplies. And then the SEL we talked about. So learning loss and SEL were very connected. One, SEL, I mean, music, fine arts, it's kind of there. The other one was talking about, especially for the curriculum money, giving them access to like new composers, traditional composers, but new representation of student body, as well as just the SEL component, because there's a lot of quality music that actually can help to check those boxes for them. And then as well as many of the different online like software programs that can be used by students and teachers to help with SEL. A lot of them, some of them use like Soundtrap to not necessarily only use music, or well, Flipgrid's free, but Soundtrap as a paid subscription per student. And so for our elementary, we put different like program, like we broke the money up and exactly how much we were going to use and ask for, and we put together like different packages that each elementary teacher will get to pick from, and then we will do all the purchasing and get them their specifics. For secondary, we went out and talked to like as many of our teachers as we could, and the best thing we felt like we could do was just say, okay, we put together, they each get $2,300 per year for the next 3 years to determine. And now there are guidelines, like
based on their needs.
Yeah, so it can be for curriculum, it can be for music, it can be for beginning band books, it can be for online software, so they can purchase subscriptions to different programs if that's what they deem used, and it'll be per year for 3 years.
Awesome.
I think that's a good start.
That's a lot, but thanks for sharing. And I love that you shared sort of what the dream list was and then where you ended up going based on how your district was prioritizing the needs around what would come out of ESSER funds. So Joe, talk about your experience, what happened for you and how did you experience this working with your administration as an administrator?
Yeah, as an administrator. All right. Well, I don't have such a nice, polite story. It's a little rocky in the beginning, Joseph. Joseph, congratulations. And Joseph, I love that you said that you talked to your teachers. I think that's fantastic. And that's one thing we've been fortunate too, is that we took our teachers with us every step of the way and asked their input on everything. And they surprise me every time. So I'm always glad that I recalibrate with what they want. So I appreciate you said that. So we in Texas, besides being the fine arts director in a great district, it's very, very supportive. Spring ISD, it's in Houston. But I'm also the past president of all the fine arts directors in Texas. So there's about 220 of us. And so we all work together. Very, very collaborative group. And I see some teachers from Texas here too. So Socorro and Fort Bend, quick shout out to you guys. But in Texas, we developed a plan, like a proposal to use ESSER funds. So we developed it first in spring, and then I bounced it off of our state board, and then we shared it. We shared it statewide. So I had a plan. We had a long version. We had a short version. We figured out real quick that some people like the long version, where we listed all 15 criteria because it's 15 at the time, with the catch-all. It's kind of like other study, or other duties as assigned. Number 15.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was great. And so we used number 3, number 8, and I think 11, and then 15. But we shared it statewide, and then we got feedback on it. And so we tweaked it as we went. But statewide, the plan earned over $100 million, like within the first couple months. So 100 million, this plan. So I was very proud. We started it. I did not finish it, so I'm not saying that it was ours, but through a lot of development and draft, and we have it, and we'll share it with you guys today. So everybody here, you're going to get everything that I'm talking about. So we shared it, and here's the funny story: is I took my own plan and I submitted it, and I said this plan has made $100 million across the state, and I asked for 3.6 million, denied. So the same plan that I sent out that had $100 million was denied just for 3.6 million, which, and we in the district, that's about 3% of what the ask was. And the point was, I went back and I met with my CFO and my CFO, and I said, hey, you didn't like the plan, and I'm going to tell you, and I love my CFO and I love all the people that I'm talking about in this chain thing, but when you dump so much money into a system that's not prepared for it, you're going to have
It's overwhelming.
It is overwhelming. So I say this with all respect, but I need you guys to hear me. When I went to my CFO and I said, you didn't like my plan, she said, what plan? She never saw my plan. And so please hear me. When you submit things, it's you just got to get a seat at the table. And we're going to talk about that here in a little bit too. But having a seat at the table is much more important than having a plan that's rock solid. So once you have that voice in that relationship, and so I met with her and I said, no problem, I got it. I asked for 3.6. I will gladly send you directly, because I had changed supervisors. I think I had 4 different supervisors during COVID. And so 4 had come and gone. And so the CFO never saw my plan. And she honestly said, what plan? And I said, I have a great one. And I'll send it to you. So I sent it to her again, but she never got it. It was for 3.6. And then she said, well, what do you need really? And I said, now I have more, and I'll show you and I'll give you guys this too. So now it's 12.4 million. She said, you're not getting 12.4, but I'll give you 5. And so she gave me 5 million. My original ask was for 3.6. And so I got 5 million. So I have 5 million in SR2 funds right now. We are going to spend it, and I'm not as polite. We did a needs assessment. So everybody here too, you'll get a copy of the needs assessment that we use. But we found that a lot of our students were being priced out of the activity.
Right.
So as 6th grade, it broke my heart. In the beginning of COVID, I don't know how many band directors called me and said their entire 6th grade, 7th grade class just returned their instrument because it's either rent or their instrument, and they can't afford to do both. Well, spring is fantastic. We rented over $100,000 worth of instruments. We did 1 year rental, And so we rented instruments and gave them to them. But now what we're going to do is we're going to go back and buy the non-traditional instruments. We're going to buy an army of flutes, clarinets, alto sax, trumpet, trombone, French horn, anything that was traditionally rented by the parent or the family. We're now going to supply those instruments at the 6th grade level district-wide.
That's awesome.
So millions and millions will go towards beginning instruments, but also towards color guard instrument or color guard equipment, uniforms, the uniform rotations that families traditionally have to pay for. We're going to cover the uniforms. Lynn, I can go in deep, or I can give you the broad overview. But elementary, I'd say the last thing I'll add here, and then we'll go on. But ORF instruments, our ORF instruments were just really in disarray. So ORF instruments, choir risers, a lot of capital outlay we're going to purchase.
Awesome. And I love thinking about that capital outlay investment with ESSER funds, right? Because these are one-time funds. They're not going to be around forever, but these capital investments are going to impact students over years and years and years. And so that's something else to think about with ESSER funds. What could you purchase now that's going to have a nice long life in your school districts to support students as they learn, right? As they learn in the arts. So that I love that. Thanks, Joe. So I'm going to go back to Joseph. So tell me about the process. You kind of hinted at it. Who did you engage in the process, and how did you get, as Joe said, how did you get that seat at the table?
So we're very fortunate in going in. Our superintendent actually left. Like, she had announced her retirement for June of 2019, and then the world shut down, and she was like, I'm not gonna stay like this, no. And so the interim ended up being our COO, who actually had students in orchestra all the way through. Like, his kids went in orchestra through our district, and so was very supportive. And our current COO is actually married to a band director and played viola. And so we have them plus our, so I'm a director, there's an executive director of fine arts above me, and her immediate boss is the associate superintendent, which is right under the superintendent. And we just got a new one of those, which turned out to be extremely positive, because she was very forceful and very supportive and very communicative with us, which so we had all of those people who were at the table that were fighting for us. And then our current Board of Education, like all of those members, they're the ones who actually require or task the district with expanding our elementary program. Lovely. And finding the money and doing it. So we're in a very supportive situation. So like our needs are different than everyone else, but we still, it's been an interesting thing where the music community has been so much more on top of and ahead of all this money. And we kept going to them saying, when is the money? Like, when is the application process going to be ready? We're like, we have things, we've been talking to people, we're ready. And they're like, we don't know how we're going to, like, because everyone wants money. We don't know how we're going to divvy it up, or how we're going to make you apply for it, or what the criteria are going to be. And we're just like, and then when they finally put it out, it was like, oh, and you have a week to get all of this in.
Right, because they had deadlines, right? Yeah.
Yep. And so because we have a fantastic fine arts team, like of administrators and teachers in our district, we were able to just quickly, kind of put a pause on a lot of the other things we're doing and just sit down for a couple of days and write out as much as we could once we got those criteria within that week. And we've been on meetings with other people in the district, other departments that also ask for money. And we're like, okay, here's how we're going to use the money. Here's what we're going to need. Here's the prices. I'm sure the prices have gone up. We need to readjust. But they're like, oh, well, we just asked for like $2 million and got it, but we don't know. Now we have to price it out. And so we've been very ahead of making sure, like, if we went to a company and said, hey, we want to, use Art of Ed for our art teachers. Well, we went and made sure that we put them in as a vendor in the district. So that way, the second we get that money,
you're good to
and
go.
We know the teachers want, we can just put it through the system, because it's going to be clogged with all of those other departments that did not think ahead and did not do all those things. But essentially, once we once we had it, we sent it to our, boss, and he sent it on. And then we also kind of sort of passed it on through the COO. And so she would unofficially have access to all of our asks and understand, why. And we have a little facility in our music instrument repair shop. We made sure to invite all of the board members to come and tour the facility, where we have like a little white paper, we call it, that is like all the stats of, how many students are in the district, how many students are in fine arts programs, and then like previous to COVID, and then what it is now. And it's just like a little quick, hey, this really impacted, and if you're here touring, you obviously know the value of the arts and for students and what they need right now. And it was just like as many ways that we can get access to anybody who has their voice that can possibly be heard, we would just reach out. And there was a couple times we got told, don't do that, or don't do that again. We're like, okay, better to ask forgiveness than permission in those particular instances, because the people we talked to still heard us.
Right. And I love that you're speaking not only to sort of the work that you did around these funds, but that this is ongoing systematic advocacy and relationship building work that happens over time, which queued you up to be successful with the conversations around ESSER. That's awesome. All right, Joe, so tell us about you told us, you hinted a little bit at your process, but who did you engage with, and how did you, besides dealing with all of those administrative changes on your end, who do you recommend, and across Texas, like what voices were engaged in this work as other districts were successful with your great template?
Yeah, no, and I think Joseph really nailed it too. One, we never stopped talking to our teachers. We never stopped asking what our teachers needed. And second, I always had, and Joseph talked about like the white paper, we always had a one-pager of needs assessment. So like the one thing that we learned real quick too is like we have a long proposal that was like 20 some pages, because some people like the long one, but we had people that just wanted the one pager. And so we always walked around with a one pager of needs assessment. And so like I learned this from friends too, that other fine arts directors too, but we would always plug in things that we needed. We need uniforms, we need instruments, we need this. And then what is your cause? Why do you need this? What is the purpose? What need will this serve? And how does it relate to, and for the ESSER, how does it relate to one of the 15 categories? So we immediately had to place it in one of the 15 categories. We address what need it is, like how would this impact kids recovering quicker from the COVID pandemic? And so we addressed that in the proposal, and it was always one page, like little boxes. And again, we'll share this with you guys too. But it never got past like 3 pages, but like once it got multi-million and explanations, it was probably about 3 pages at the longest though, but still we always wanted it like a one pager. And then that way, the elevator speech for any of my new bosses that came in to the, I was like, hey, how you doing? I need $12 million. And this is the why. And then I would always update them and say, your predecessor said this, and so this is what I'm doing now. And I would always have evidence too. And Joseph, I don't know if you ran into that too, but as everybody changed, I had to remind people what their predecessor said. And so I started with a paper trail. I learned real quick to have a paper trail of what was promised or what was earmarked.
Suggested or earmarked, yeah.
Suggested. I love that. Yeah, suggested better. But yeah, the needs assessment was really invaluable.
Awesome. All right, so I know we've been at this now for about 35 minutes or so. So I'm wondering if we've got questions from the attendees that we should be addressing. So Jen?
Yes, so let me go over here. There's a couple questions in here. The first one is, what band choir things fall within the realm of ESSER money? And I know we touched on that. The second part is, how do I go explaining this to my admin?
All right, I'll let Joe and Joseph start off. So Joe, go for it.
Okay. Yes, I'm buying everything from flutes to like beginning instruments all the way to professional instruments to kind of help out. And I also have an alumni band that I'm trying to help to it, but everything that ties back to recovering from COVID. So in the title, and can I share a screen real quick? Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. So, and just to show this real quick, this is our Title IV needs assessment. Let me do the ESSER. But here's the SR3 needs assessment. And Lynn, this is funny, but at the top of my SR3 needs assessment, I have the same quote from the federal government. So this is,
Yeah, you're providing reassurance to your administrators that it's okay to spend the funds there. That's exactly what that does. Brilliant.
yeah, and we had, this is a Google Doc, and we always put the hyperlink there too, to the document of where it says exactly and what page number it's on, page 30. So like we told exactly everybody, yes, you can use this, because in Texas, there was a time where we were thinking, can you or can you not? And even our state, our SEA didn't know. And then this came out. So once this came out, we feel a lot better, but we made sure this is at the top of the needs assessment. So just a real quick rundown, then I'll hand it over to Joseph. But the purpose, like we're trying to start instructional rounds. So instructional rounds to help the teachers get supported in the classroom. The recipient would be the coverage for the PBA teacher, so subs. We have the cost here, how we're going to implement it, and that's it. So you have like one little item right there. Then you have the next item. You'll have stipends, and you'll have like down as it gets further down, you'll have instrument replacement costs and stuff like that. But it's like a one little bullet thing where you show the purpose, you show how it's connected, like what is it going to help, and then what's the impact, and then you go on. And then you have that, and usually they ask for something like in a breakdown formula, because they have to have the object code. So when they apply for it and they submit it in Texas, they have to have the object code. So like 6100, 6200, 6300.
Yep.
So we did this for them because that's exactly what it looks like on the title submission. So we backtracked. We went all the way to like, what does our federal funds person have to submit? And then how do we make that job easier for them? And so we took it all the way to the 6300 level, and then we blacked it out. Again, this will be for you guys too. If you guys want this, you can. But I can't stress it enough before I get to Joseph. Like, it's the goal is not the money asked, it's to get the seat at the table. Because even if you have like a title, if you have a seat at the table for Title IV, then you probably had a seat at the table for ESSER. But if you didn't have a seat at Title IV, you need at least to get a seat at the table and say, hey, I'm worth having at this table. And what is it Mary said at NAMS? If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So I like that a lot. And that's never been truer. Sorry, I took too much time. Joseph?
No, that was great. Joseph?
I know, I love all of that, Joe. That's great. Our district actually kind of required us to fill out a budget modification form, which actually had those in it. So that was one of the things that they made us do for all of them when we first applied. I think the big things for us were making sure, because our district, we didn't have to sell them on the importance of fine arts and how it affects students. It was just, and our district didn't the 15, how it could be qualified, or 16, didn't really apply to us as much as it was, they had their 5 goals, that what they wanted. And so we really just had to tie it into those. And realistically, with fine arts in general, everything is SEL. We do. And then it was talking about training or bringing in people to train our teachers on SEL because it's different, or we're in a different situation where instruments were not the issue for us, because we have recurring funds from mill levy issue that our city pays for that keeps us getting funds. And we also, in the beginning, they denied us PPE. They said, we'll give you masks, but not content specific anything, masks or bell covers or anything. And so we had to shift. We had the money to shift, and we did it. And then that was a big, look, this is how much money we couldn't spend on instruments because you wouldn't give us this from the first CARES set of money. And when we went to like the COO, that was like a huge, that's not okay. They're like, we can't reimburse those funds because, you can't take federal money and plug it into and we're like, that's fine, but we need to make sure that this doesn't happen. And it shifted some of those doors. And then okay, we need to make sure. We sent out at the very beginning, it was like, okay, here's your board members for each of your schools. Make sure if you're doing virtual concerts, are you inviting them? Here's their email address. Here's the COO.
Keep them connected.
Here's everybody, like, you need to be going, you need to be inviting them. And then we give them a little one-page advocacy thing that they put on the back of their programs if it's in person, like that. Some of our teachers have been doing it for years. It's just on the back of every single program that they have ever printed. But it's that getting them talking to those board members, or the communication with them was huge. And because anything we do, any supply you need, any piece of equipment you need, can be tied into the learning loss that they all talk about, and the SEL and access. Like equitable
Absolutely.
access was a big one. And, you know, we can't have schools that have no risers and schools that have beautiful new risers and have purchased the 4th row steps. And well, we needed to get them for everyone everywhere. And that was basically meant everything could be used.
Awesome.
Okay, great. So the next question, which I do believe we've already answered, but do these federal funds require grant writing skills? And that's not for the educator, if I understand right. It's not their job to be filling these grants out.
That's exactly right. That's right, Jen. So these grants are going to be filled out and sent to the state for blessing and to get the funds back by your federal programs person. But you heard from both Joe and Joseph that the forms, if you're fortunate enough to have that seat at the table and they're asking for something in documentation, they may give you forms that look a lot like what they're going to have to put up and you know, sort of collate across everyone's making ask and get over to the state. So don't panic. It's just a spreadsheet, and it's just the way in which they think about how the budget is put together. So if that's not your area of expertise, find someone in your advocacy group that can do that for you, but it's not really that hard. It's just figuring out where that ask is going to fit on that template.
I would say that an important part of grant writing, though, is the knowing, even if you don't have a seat at the table, knowing who is at the table.
There you go.
And like when we present to our CFO, it is a much different presentation than when we present to the board members, because the CFO, she is all numbers, and like we need to know, well, this is how many students we have, this is how many instruments we have,
Yep.
This is what we need, and this is why, and this is what, whereas everyone else, sometimes there's more emotion in it or more connection of a story. And so that aspect of grant
know your
writing
audience
can be very powerful.
That's exactly what I was, just to chime in, it's just like reading the room, right? Like it's like knowing the audience you're performing for. So if you're reading the room and it's the board member, man, tell that sob story. But if it's the CFO, that sob story is not going to get you anything. They want to see a number and a graph. That's funny. I like that.
And we are going to go a little past our time because we have a 30-minute break before the next round of sessions. So we're not going to cut you off right at time here. So there's 2 more questions. One is a great transition. This is such a rich presentation. Thank you. And what would you recommend as a first step to getting that seat at the table?
Joe, would you like to go first?
I like Joseph's comment. You got to know who's sitting at the table. I think the main thing too is be prepared. So the federal funds, it's very well articulated in like policy, like what they're looking for. You need to know you have like Lynn said, you're going to have to do the budget sheet, the budget tracking sheet. You don't have to, but they have to. So not only knowing who's at the table so you can get to the table and have those conversations, but know what's going to make you stay at the table. So like if you have to have a community engagement, the district has to have a meeting with the community. Okay, that doesn't mean you have to, but if you did and you had that document ready, you can say, hey, I've already met with my community. If we were to get funds, this is how we would spend them. You have to be careful, but you have to say, like, yes, I have that. Now, don't feel like you have to do those meetings. It's one person that has to do it. It's the district that has to do it, and they submit it. But if you know that ahead of time and you get to that table and you can say, hey, I have a community. I have like a band booster club. I have a music elementary choir club that gets together. They would be a perfect venue for you to do that. If you bring that to the table, that would help. The last thing I'll say too is you have to contribute to the table that you're at. So when you get there, you have to be a contributing member of the table. Like if you come to dinner, you don't have to bring like the meatloaf, but you got to bring like a vegetable, or you got to bring like something, a dessert. or bring the bottle of wine, or else you're not going to get invited back. So if you get to the table, you have to contribute. You have to open your mouth. You have to know what we're talking about, and you have to go around and you have to make that table better, or else you will not get invited back. That's my 2 cents. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that was great. I think I've kind of hinted or said it before, but like with the knowing the people that are at the table and making sure that you give them as much information as possible. We even went to our teachers because, we were constantly with our teachers the whole way and saying, now, if you're in a place that has union, we said, hey, here's what we're asking for. We sent out all of our proposals to all of our teachers saying, this is what's being submitted. These are the reasons why, you've given us all this feedback. You should probably go to the union and tell them that these things are necessary and why that they should approach it as well. Or if you want to send it to any parent groups, that the parents can approach the board or can approach. It was like, how much pressure can we apply without officially applying the pressure and get other people to just help advocate? It might be different in some places that don't have as much community support, but if that's the case, then the job becomes also building that community support.
Exactly.
Joseph, if I can tag on, that's brilliant again. And the thing about saying getting the teacher voice, remember that when you go to that table and you get a seat at that table, the people at the table don't have that same connection with your teachers and with your parents that you do. You have something that they don't have and that they want desperately. The last 2 or 3 years, we have all lost connection with our community. And if you can provide a way to get back and connected to that community, like, you will have a seat at that table. Now, whether you earn it,
you'll be valued, right?
Yes, yeah, you'll be a valued member. You can say, yes, I have 300 parents that showed up at my concert, and this is what they said. Like, no one's going to say, never mind, we don't want to hear what they said. You go back to your classroom. No one's going to say that. Yeah, that's a great point, Joseph.
Great. One last question. How can new charter schools obtain ESSER funds to start new music programs and basic music instruction in general music classes?
So I'll start on that one. And then if you guys want to add in. So again, so as a charter school, there are several things. The favorite answer of any federal education funds, can I do that with federal funds? The answer is almost always, it depends. And for this charter school, the answer is going to be, it depends, right? And first of all, it has to be a nonprofit charter school. A for-profit charter school can access federal dollars. Okay, so you have to be a nonprofit charter school. You have to qualify to receive Title I funds. So you're going to have to be able to document that there is substantive poverty for the students who are attending your school. And if your schools, and you know that your charter is already pulling down Title I funds, then chances are there's an allocation of ESSER funds available for you. And so, if you're not meeting those criteria, you're not going to have access to ESSER funds. That doesn't mean that you can't start a new program or build a new program. You're just going to look for other funding sources. And there's nothing wrong with that. So,
Lynn, isn't it on the website too? Like we did, we used to track ESSER funds in other states. So
absolutely.
So there's a way. And I see the question there too. So if you want to go into your state's jump in, Lynn, but your state's education website,
agency, your Department of Ed website,
and then type in allocations and ESSER, and maybe and then you'll have to fish a little bit because it's different in different states, but you'll find the allocations under ESSER.
Right, and they'll be by district. And again, if you've got nonprofit charter schools that are eligible for this funds, they'll list their, under the LEA. So whatever that district name is for your charter. Sometimes it's the charter name. Sometimes the charters are part of a larger network, in which case it would be under that network name. But yep, that'll all be sitting there. Good point, Joe.
And Smart Music has a blog post up that has links where you can see and do research state by state and nail down
awesome
district level, so you can see what funding has been allocated, what estimates if it hasn't been allocated yet. So I will find that link and I will put that in the chat here, and I'll also throw it in the community board for everybody. And I think that was our last question. So with that, I think we're going to wrap up. Thank you so much, Lynn, Joe, and Joseph, for your time and the great conversation. We really appreciate it. And for everybody who's joining the session, a couple ending housekeeping notes. There is a rate button under the description. So we'd love to hear your feedback on this session, any thoughts you have. The community board is still open, so you can go over there if you want to continue the dialogue. And I think that is it. So thank you
Great.
again for everybody. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Enjoy
Thank
the
you.
rest of the afternoon, everybody.
Great. Thanks. Bye. Thank
Hey,
you,
thanks,
guys.
Lynn. That was awesome. It was good.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. All right.
Yeah, you guys are awesome.
Yeah, no problem. See you.
All right. Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Bye.